Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today's episode, we're going to be working on a epoxy river table that has some tattoo supplies in the middle of it. So the first steps that you need to do you have to make a form to pour the epoxy in so it can cure. So here I'm just making a form out of a 1/2 inch plywood base and then some 3/4 inch for the sides. While I have a second, if you have not yet, please like and subscribe to the channel. Really helps me out, really helps the channel grow, so that I can keep producing videos. So once you get the sides done, I just used a bunch of common 2.5 inch screws for the put two sides together, and then I made sure that I countersunk all of the screws that are going on the back, so that I don't split the plywood any. I was hoping that I could reuse this piece in the end, which I can, because none of the epoxy got on the plywood. So like I said, so you have to make a form. I put the screws, I think I put like maybe 4 at the top or 4 on the sides, 5 or 6 on the longer sides. And while I'm thinking of it, so this epoxy countertop ended up being something like 66 inches long, maybe 69 inches long, and then it was like 20 inches wide. So here I was trying, I failed to mention, this is my second ever epoxy pour. So I'm trying to base this off of the lessons I learned from the first one. So the first lesson that I used some tape, and I taped the bottom. That didn't work, so I tried this tyvex wrap, and it worked perfectly. And then so I lined the whole bottom of the form with the tyvex wrap. Took my black walnut that I got where I bought it from. They kiln dried it, flattened it, planed it, took all the bark off of it. So I had little to no elbow grease in the sides. So once I moved that, I actually ended up moving that inside of my house, is where I ended up pouring it at, because the epoxy needs to cure in around 70-degree temperature. So our house is naturally set on 69, 70. So I moved that inside, and I ended up pouring it inside, because here in Alabama, it's this time of year, I think it's like 25 to 40. So it would be impossible for that to cure outside. So, or in my shop that's not insulated yet. So here is the epoxy I use. I use liquid glass. I just ordered this on Amazon. It comes in a 3-gallon kit, which I'll link all that below. It's a 2-to-1 mixture. You have a part A and a part B. It tells you on the bottles how to use it. So you just the part that's actually the epoxy, I just poured like 2 quarts of it. And then I'd pour a quart, or 24 ounces, I think is what it ended up being. I'll pour 24 ounces of the hardener, and this was just for the base. So the customer of mine wanted the base to be black, because it's going to be a countertop, so he didn't want people seeing into the counters. So I poured the bottom of it black, which you'll see the pigment here. Once again, I'll link all that below. And then once I poured the black epoxy, I end up clearing the rest of it. So here I just took a spoonful of the pigment, and then I used also another mixer, just my drill and a mixing tool. So I got it off Amazon, and I mixed that up for roughly 4 to 5 minutes. This is one of those steps you don't want to skip. Mix more than what you think you have to mix. Like as far as time wise, just mix it for 5 minutes. So here you see the form I have set up that you saw previously. Then I took a bunch of clamps. The wood was already really flat. I was just trying to make sure that no epoxy floated up under the wood. And so one major step I did not do, that I didn't think I had to do, and ended up coming in the end. It messed me up a little bit in the end, but I did not seal these edges with polyurethane. So make sure that you seal the inside live edge part of polyurethane. And then when you take off all the clamps and all that, when you get to do the top coat, seal the top coat with polyurethane so you do not have air bubbles. I ended up fighting that battle for like a few days. Had a few air bubbles come up in the end, but anyway, so here you see I poured the black epoxy. It came out absolutely beautiful. And then once you pour it, give it 30 minutes or so, and then you can come back and hit it with some fire or a torch. So what this does is this releases all the air bubbles. They all come to the top, and then you hit it with the torch, and all the air bubbles go away. And it's actually quite satisfying to watch that happen. You'll do this multiple times. I let this cure for 24 hours, and then I placed the ink bottles and ink caps and needles and whatever that the customer wanted to put in there. That's what I put in there. If I had to do this again, I'd probably fill those bottles up with something solid. I had a few of them float up, which I just created me a little wood piece with a screw on the end of it to poke them down to make sure they stay down while the epoxy cured. Once I got all those in, I just poured the next coat. So this was to finish the river. Clear coat in the river, filled the whole thing up. I think I ended up using something like 5 gallons of epoxy. It was like 4 and some change. So it's hard to judge. There's plenty of YouTube videos out there to tell you how to get pretty close, and they're pretty accurate at measuring the river and the depth of it and whatnot. Which I had guessed, and I got pretty close. So once you get that clear, it's going to look really foggy in the beginning, but give it time. This stuff takes like 72 hours to cure in total. But so that I've done the bottom part, and then now I'm doing the middle, and I hit it with the fire. About probably like once every hour. Even I think I woke up at like midnight and came in there and hit it. But the next day, when it was kind of getting gooey and getting real, tough, I gave this another 24 hours. This is 24 hours later. It's not solid, but it's really tough and gooey. And then from there, I poured the final coat, which is going over the whole top. Most people would stop here, and then they would run it through a planer or whatever, sand off the old epoxy that's on the wood, and then just put like some kind of oil. You can do that. My customer wanted the whole thing to be epoxy, so naturally here I am making an epoxy rectangle. So I poured the epoxy. I mixed up the rest of what I had. Like I said, it ended up being about 5 gallons, somewhere around there. Poured it across the whole top, smoothed it out, and then this was, 7 or 8 hours later. You see my air bubbles still coming up. You hit it with the torch and they go away. We hit it with a torch I let this set for 72 hours. Between my wife and I, when I wasn't home, she babysat it, and we had some air bubbles come up on one of the pieces of wood. But so anyway, so the tyvex wrap peels right off amazingly. I'll always use this stuff from now on. I had no leaks. I didn't have to spray any kind of mold release spray. The stuff just peeled right off, and it was great to know that. So once I got to that point, here I'm showing you the air bubbles that I had. To fix this, you just got to sand it down, sand out the pits, and pour some epoxy in it, which is what I did in the end. But it's quite annoying that I had to fix it. And you can kind of tell, which I know it's there, so you can kind of tell, that I had to do that. So once you get it out of the form, I ran each edge through my table saw just to barely trim off the edge. And then each of the shorter sides, I ran through, I put on my miter saw. I made sure that the blade was pretty new, my miter saw blade. This was literally a brand new blade. It has never cut anything but this epoxy. I just wanted a super clean cut. And this table saw, it's a 220. See, I have 2 table saws. This one is the 220 table saw I use for the bigger stuff. Because this epoxy is hard, and it ate right through it like butter. But I trimmed on each side. Don't be afraid to mess this up. because you can't. It's not going to splinter or anything. You have to give it 72 hours to cure. That's the big thing. In the around-ish 70 degree temperature. But once you do that, like I trimmed all the sides. Here I mentioned earlier about the air bubbles that I had come up. Sanded those back down. The best I could. I had some corners that were kind of flared up a little bit. I hit it with 320 grit sander. And then so this is almost pretty much the final piece here. So it came out absolutely beautiful. I sanded all the corners, all the sides, all the corner sides, whatnot, just to make sure they're all even and flat. There's no like jagged edges. And then once I've done all this sanding, I moved it back in my house, and that's when I poured. I used just some tabletop epoxy that cures a little quicker, and I poured it on in those air bubbles, to try to seal those up. But lessons I've learned from this: a really good epoxy is key. Personally, this liquid glass, I'll probably forever use it. I have no reason to get away from it. It's done me well. I'm sure this is only my second ever epoxy pour. The first one was my island, and I made mistakes on it, and it shows. But this one came out wonderful. So appreciate the time, guys. Appreciate the watching. Have lots of more videos to come. Thank you.